Hello, and welcome to the DCIFF Film Chat Podcast. I'm Erin DeVos, and I'll be your host for this season. Join us for insightful interviews that explore the work of up-and-coming independent filmmakers from all over the world. If you're passionate about film and keen to learning about the creative process from the future cinema greats, this podcast is a must-listen for you. Our mission is to provide listeners with the engaging and informative conversations about successful and innovative films, including features, shorts, documentaries, animation, and web series from across the globe. The DCIFF Film Chat Podcast is a unique opportunity for independent filmmakers to have their voices heard in a way no other film festival can provide. You can listen to the DCIFF Film Chat Podcast on all podcast platforms or visit our website at DCIFF-indie.org/DCIFF-podcast. Thank you. Thank you so much, John, for joining us on the DCIFF Film Chat Podcast. Really excited to meet with you today. We'll be chatting about his animated film, Next Show in 90 Minutes, where it's part of our experimental animation program for DCIFF 2025. So again, welcome, John.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, so for those who are not familiar with you, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and as well as your nominated film?
Yeah, so I am a professional animator and assistant professor of animation at the University of South Alabama. I've been working in the industry for about 18 years at this point. Yeah, and I've been teaching for about 15 or 16, initially part-time and then slowly over time full-time, and now I'm on a tenure track here at South. Most of my industry experience is in television and streaming media, so cartoons on like Netflix and I guess cartoons that used to be on like MTV or like ABC Family when that was still like short-lived channel, like that kind of thing. Primarily 2D stuff, a lot of things in what used to be called Flash, but is now called Adobe Animate. And my current short film is animated in Toon Boom Harmony, which is also the software that I teach. So yeah, so that's kind of me. The film is just shy of 7.5 minutes. It's a horror film, is the way I've described it, and that's most of the festivals it's been in so far have been genre style festivals. Actually, yeah, it's a horror film. It's set in Yellowstone National Park. It's interesting because I'm in the experimental block of shorts. I would not consider myself an experimental animator. Definitely my career is narrative-based stuff, episodic things. But again, those are things that I'm just being paid to work on. It's not like I was a showrunner or anything like that. But the film, it's there's no dialogue, which I think is what helps it feel experimental. But it's yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's hard for me to get into it because I don't if I say anything that feels like I'm describing the plot, then it's almost like it gives the whole thing away.
Oh, that's
Uh,
valid.
but yeah, it's weird and a little like I have to be like strangely trepidatious, although I probably don't need to be, but for some reason, like my inclination is to do that. But basically, it's a kind of uh, post-apocalyptic kind of almost like a travelogue or nature observational thing that is also not completely free of conflict, but it's more about vibe and feeling than anything else, which I also think is what like lends itself to the idea of being experimental.
Mhm.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, no, I think
That's a mouthful.
yeah, no, but I think how you described it is, perfectly well because I think that's exactly why we shared it in this category was because there was no sound, so you really had to live through the visuals of this film, even though it's short, there's a lot to tell, like, within this, so I welcome everyone to check out our website and the movie poster, and there's also a trailer too for the film as well that we had shared, just to get a deeper glimpse, and So that makes me think of like one of the first questions I have for you is like, what made you like decide to go with this angle to not, it is in a way like a silent film, but it's a silent animation, and I feel we haven't really like seen that style or what's
Yeah.
been happening like in today. So I would love to,
Yeah.
expand on that a little bit more.
Well, I do want to like clarify just for the audience. It's not silent.
All
There's
right. Yeah.
sound effects and there's a score.
Hmm.
There's just no spoken dialogue.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, there's some practical reasons. Like part of it was if you don't write dialogue, you don't have to worry about the voice acting and then getting that recorded well and getting it kind of like mastered correctly and casting and kind of all of those things. But also it aside from like a couple hundred drawings that were colored by my wife just to kind of push it over the finish line, there's not really any other physical hands on the footage.
Mhm.
And because I was animating it completely by myself, there was also this element of if I get someone else speaking, if I make a character say something, then I just kind of wanted it to be just my voice,
Mhm.
even though my voice isn't in it. So there is an element of that to it. Although the final sound mix and all the Foley and stuff was done by a guy named Mike Horton, who was fantastic and brought a lot to it. And then the score was done by Scott Ampleford, who is a composer and short filmmaker himself. And so they brought a ton to it. So I don't want to, I definitely don't want to just exclude their contributions because their contributions were quite large. For me, making the film was a little bit of an experiment. Most of my career was spent making children's media, things for like Sesame Street and like Nickelodeon and Captain Underpants kind of stuff on Netflix. So I wanted to do something that explored my interest in horror. I wanted to do something that kind of pointed to my mom's kind of interest in horror. She was a big horror film and like Stephen King kind of avid reader. So partially because of that, my previous film was a children's cartoon. Like my previous personal film that had been in festivals was just straight up a kids cartoon. And I ended up having a lot of people kind of putting their hands on that one. And by the time I ended up finishing it, I didn't really like where it ended up. And that was no fault of theirs, anyone who helped me do it. But there was just a lot of it was a thesis film. So it was also part of like going through grad school. And there were just a lot of hands kind of touching it and pulling it in different directions. And so with this one, trying to do it primarily by myself meant that whether it turned out good or bad, I would know that it was my vision that made it what it was. Whereas this previous film, by the time I ended, by the time it was released, it wasn't the film that I really wanted to make anymore, which was just the way kind of things turned out. It wasn't anybody's fault or some sort of like someone being mean or something like that. It was just the vibe that I had. Whereas with this one, like for better or for worse, it's mine. So that's kind of part of why there aren't any voice actors in it. And then just kind of the theming, the fact that it's horror and the fact that it's set in this place that we think of as being kind of naturally and physically idyllic, this national park that for the most part most of us Americans kind of cherish and venerate the national parks and the national park system. It was, it's a little bit about COVID. It's a little bit about just death and dealing with death and grief. It's a little bit about this idea of the beauty of nature and its kind of endearing. I don't want to use beauty twice in the same sentence, but I guess I'm going to. But just that kind of, the idea of like, untouched by man, and there's some worth in that, but also at the same time, if we're not there to appreciate it, what is that worth? And, I think there's some stuff in it that is a little bit of a criticism of kind of like eco-fascism, that kind of idea of the world would be great if there were no people.
Mhm.
And I'm like, the world's not the world if there's no people. So there's some, there's a lot of weird stuff in it. Perhaps unpleasant things even, but that's what it is.
Mhm. Yeah, no, and I love how you talked about the different themes in your film too, because I feel like there's a lot to unpack, like not only just about, culturally like what's happening today, but also like society itself, like in the sense of how we're even like communicating with one another and being able to showcase like this idea of like not only like the post-apocalyptic world, but like a world without like humans and like what that kind of evolves into. Like yeah. So once everyone sees the film, like they'll kind of understand like in the sense of what that means. But it just made me really think when I had watched it myself, because to be able to see a world, like, especially through animation, like, I love how, like, imagination just really drives us into, like, that creative space, so you hit, like, a lot of different topics that I really think a lot of us could really think about, and that's what's also cool, like, with the program and how we have it laid out too, like, in your specific block, like, we have this as the last film, and it's certainly last but not least to be able to showcase it, but it kind of leaves you, hanging, like, in the sense of what we could be thinking about in the world today, so well, especially with what's going on in our
Yeah.
climate in the United States, so.
Yeah, yeah, I'm pretty excited to see it in the context of the program.
Mhm,
I haven't I've attended 3 different festivals so far with it, and it has not been the end of a program yet,
mhm,
so that's gonna be interesting, but that's kind of like, and again, that's the thing with talking about it, which makes me, like, a little weary of, like, talking about the film too much, is
mhm,
because for me, like, what I want out of the experience is just kind of like to kinda catch the vibe of the audience.
mhm,
When I released my previous film, it was in festivals in 2020, which means it wasn't actually in festivals. It was only streaming or
mhm,
really limited kind of release stuff, and I didn't get to see it with any audiences, but a single festival right before kind of lockdowns happened.
mhm,
So, mm, I'm just excited to kind of, like, see every time I've gotten to see it is just kind of like getting this idea of, like, being in the room with people watching it is kind of fascinating for me, and kind of getting their reactions, both positive and negative, is really, really exciting.
mhm,
But yeah, with animation, and this was an interesting thing for me because again, most of my past experiences have been for children's media, which is there's a quality to it that is very kind of bouncy and lively and frenetic, and the visuals tend towards a an aesthetic that references realism but isn't trying to approach realism.
mhm,
And one of the challenges with this film was trying to get an aesthetic that almost approached illustration in the moments that are more still, that feel more like a graphic novel, and but also in a very, very loose, I don't want to like sound like I'm tooting my own horn kind of a thing, but almost like painted postcards and posters and imagery that we get with tourism and the National Park Service and things like that. So striking vistas and visuals like that, and so the way I approached the camera was also this one that is supposed to evoke in a lot of moments, almost like you're watching nature documentary or something like that,
mhm,
where the camera is very passive, and therefore when it's not, it's supposed to mean a little bit more. And we'll see, I don't know how effective that was, but that was the thought process when I'm laying it out. And that type of animation that is supposed to feel a little bit closer to realism than cartoon is incredibly time consuming and difficult and challenging, especially because it's not something that I've done very much of.
Mhm.
And so I hope that what I think works is that there is that and you can feel it, but it is still, hand drawn. So it does have that like feeling of like limitless imagination. Like anything could happen, even though the presentation of it feels grounded in a way that like kind of your casual kids cartoon doesn't.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's very well said, and, like, even which also, like, sparks a question, and you kinda had this answer in a way too, which is, like, what types of style, like, animation do you prefer? Like, in the I mean, maybe not, like, prefer, but, like, where you feel like you can be able to be, like, most creative, like, whether it's, like, for, like, the children audience or, like, more into this horror type of genre?
I think they're I think you can do both in terms of like which
Mhm,
one could be most creative. I think if you are like trying to figure out the kind of the visual tropes and signifiers of a particular style or a particular genre or particular medium, then it becomes a thing of like if you feel comfortable, then you can start pushing on the walls.
mhm,
And I think that that's again, I feel like the last 10 or 20 years, maybe not financially, but probably like mid 90s, and honestly, like even the streaming boom, children's media has like had a real golden era.
mm,
And that may be coming to an end now. The animation industry is not doing particularly great this year and hasn't, there's been a downturn for sure, but like, the number of shows that were produced very quickly for Amazon and Netflix and Hulu and the big boom of the Cartoon Network shows and things like that, kind of pre the HBO Discovery merger, like the level of creativity, the sophistication of storytelling, the breadth of topics and themes, the amount of like representation in children's media has just been kind of spectacular and worth mentioning and worth kind of celebrating. But at the same time, there has been a huge influx of adult animation, not just from like 2000s era Adult Swim kind of stuff, but also like more like not necessarily comedy stuff. A lot of kind of adult dramatic things, of Love, Death, and Robots on Netflix and Scavenger's Reign and that stuff. So, I'm just kind of like part of that wave. I think that's really kind of where the film fits in. I don't think I would not say it's like groundbreaking in its combination of medium and themes, but it's definitely like in conversation with just like my career and where I am at, but also just like all these things that are going on. And there are some like painfully obvious references that I'm making or things that I am inspired by that I'm very, very, very loosely sanding the serial numbers off on. So the live action horror that I find appealing, it's pretty obvious what some of those like classic films are by my film. But also there are things in the animation community that that I'm reaching towards. There's independent filmmakers who also work in the industry that I am looking at what they're doing and kind of intentionally just trying to get to that level.
mhm,
People like Nick Cross, who was the art director on like Over the Garden Wall, but also has like 7, 8 like incredible short films that he's done independently that have beautiful like painted backgrounds and nature scenes and things like that. And like I'm trying to emulate that a little bit. I'm not doing it in the exact style that he does things, but just that evoking that feeling. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question on with that one, but
Yeah, no, I think you did, and also like you go into like the different, different types of questions I wanted to ask you too, like in the sense of like where, the animation world, like it's so, global, well, very much so in the sense that I feel there was one point that you had mentioned, and I'm trying to remember where it's about that well, the different styles of animation, like, between, like, children, like, adult animation, and also just seeing, like, all the different, like, types of streaming services and as well as, distributors who are expanding to different types of animation as well, and I just think of, like, some of, like, the box office, like, hits that even happened, like, within the past year, like, with animation. So there was, Inside Out 2, that was very globally well known. I believe Flow is also out right now too, which is a very it's a charming they're very charming films, and it made me think of a question to ask, like, do you see, like, animation as a way of, like, being universal? Because I feel that, there's so many different languages that, worldwide, and animation, I feel, can be really, you know, put in that position to be able to have those different, like, subtitles or all those different languages, but also ultimately animation shows emotion where I feel a lot of us can really understand and relate to even on a non-verbal level. So I wanted to, yeah, chat about that a little bit too, because you highlighted some of those points I feel that really led up to this question. Yeah, I guess we'll expand
yeah.
there.
So yeah, it's hmm, animation. It's not a genre, but definitely in America and in like Western audiences, it often feels like it is because there is this emphasis on products for children, teens, kind of things like that. It's almost like it's almost like the idea of like young adult novels.
Mhm,
Like a young adult novel can be anything. A young adult is anything. Like
mhm,
but we tend to, when you say young adult, what you mean is, Hunger Games, and like that's not what all young adult necessarily needs to be, but it's this kind of signifier. So when you say to someone on the street animation or cartoons, they're gonna go Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, and that kind of stuff is what it is. And we know it's not, like I don't uh, we you can't lump like Miyazaki in with that stuff. Like there's a difference. There's a maturity, even if there's no profanity, no crassness, no violence, and there is violence in the Miyazaki stuff, but no nudity,
mhm,
like and also like not everything is big budget like a Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks thing, like Flow, which I have not gotten the chance to see yet, but I have read a lot about it and watched a lot of clips. That is a multinational, relatively lower budget, using access to the software they could get access to kind of a thing. It's very much it's an indie film, totally. And it is the vision of a director that is like a very strong personal vision. Whereas, that sometimes happens with your big budget, big studio things, but it's often, there is a story department. There is kind of a committee and an executive kind of a thing to that kind of a production. And that's a lot of television as well. But it's not a genre, it's just the medium. And so it, I do think it's incredibly universal. I do think mm, it would behoove the artists if we could get more people to kind of recognize it more as a medium and less as a genre.
mhm,
I don't really know how you do that because that's been something that people have been talking about since animation was new,
mhm.
and it's hard to get that kind of a change to become like common vernacular because it is also part of an industry. And the industry kind of like creates and propagates these signifiers of what something means because it makes it easier to advertise. It makes it easier to
Mhm.
find a target audience and all of those things. But I do think that it is being recognized more as a medium than a genre than it ever has before.
Mhm.
But also, yeah, there's something in cartooning that kind of simplifies things. And you know there are some uh, principles of cartooning, not just like principles of animation, but kind of principles of like graphic art, whether it's moving or still, where you're trying to like boil something down to its primary, most important components. I mean, that's kind of like what caricature is.
Right.
You go to the mall and a caricature artist draws you. They're highlighting like the nose is really prominent, the ears are really prominent, and like that's kind of the goof and the joke. And those, again, we can talk at length about how like that kind of boiling down of things can actually be a little dangerous. But there is this kind of essence of like getting down to the point, whatever the point is that you're trying to make, in the most appealing way. And they use appeal as an animation principle, and we often jump to like, oh, it's the audience likes it. Well, it doesn't mean the audience necessarily has to like it. It just means that the audience has to like connect with it very easily. And so the idea of like, can animation kind of cut to our emotions and make us feel things and think things in a way that's different from live action? And I think it can, because you only ever put on the screen what you want on the screen when you're making animation.
Mm.
Like everything that's there had to be made to be there.
Right.
None of it exists if it's not created wholly by a person, even if that person is typing in a code and getting it to like generate something dynamically. And I'm not talking about like algorithmically like AI. I mean like, you know, you generate smoke or an explosion or something using dynamic particle systems. There's still someone's moving a slider, someone's typing in a number, someone's making a choice on the way those particles are supposed to behave to one another. There's a design to the smoke. There's a design to the fire. There's a design to the grass and the way the wind blows through it. It's all by design. Whereas with live action, you have a control over a lot of stuff, but like, the set is the set, and the
Mm.
location shoot is the location shoot, and the lighting is the lighting, and you can augment those things and you can tweak them, but you never have the kind of finite absolute control
Mm.
that you can have in animation. And so I do think that animation can get to the point, or not really the point, but can, in the same way it can distill everything down visually for the ease of communication, it can distill feelings and vibes and emotions and themes down, because again, you're in control of every little component.
Right.
It also means that it's, stupendously labor intensive and expensive, and should cost more than live action always costs, but it rarely does when it comes to like your big budget theater releases, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you illustrated so many different types of themes to for us to not only like think about in the terms of like how like animation truly universal, but also how animation is a medium. Like that's something that's just really sticking with my head and what you said right now, because there's so many genres within animation itself and the many different types of animation, like cartoon to like stop motion, everything too. So it just makes it seem, yeah, that I feel like that there's this wave, and the more that even I've been exposed to films with through DCIFF and like having these conversations with you and other animators, it really opens the eyes, but also doors for people who listen in to understand that there's so many layers to animation that many of us like don't have the opportunity to either talk about or to be able to showcase, within clips or videos in itself. So I really appreciate you being able to illustrate that for us too.
Yeah, that's a weird topic that I think I've been, and again, it may not be apparent what topic I'm talking about, but that idea of like being able to consider the minutia and the process of something that you're watching.
Mhm.
Because, part of me is, and part of me is definitely like with the idea of like this film and that goal that I have of just kind of like catching the vibe of the audience,
Mhm.
that has a weird kind of death of the author, or I guess in this case, kind of like suicide of the author, of not really wanting to tell people like this is what I meant. This is what I was trying to tell you. Like I
Mhm.
really want to let people tell me like what do you think
Yeah.
it meant. But at the same time, something that and I was talking about it to TikTok the other day, which is weird, but is this idea of we used to be kind of more familiar with what it meant to make a film,
Mm.
live action or animation, and we've kind of lost that. And I feel like one of the big things that has kind of killed that is is a little bit of the streaming services, is this lack of physical media.
Mhm.
Because if you wanted to watch a movie again, in the 90s and early 2000s, you had to go and buy the DVD or you had to go and buy the Blu-ray. And a way that they justified the costs of those things, they were like, well, you're not just getting the movie, you're also getting all of these bonus features and these behind the scenes things and all this footage, and you're getting this director commentary. And I understand like the economics of, well, I don't want to spend $50 on a disc when I can spend $7 a month and watch 100 movies. It makes sense, but there was something kind of incredible and magical about that time period where you had a behind the scenes featurette.
Mm.
We get that a little bit, like people release things onto like websites, and there's a little bit of stuff on like Disney Plus about the making of some of their shows and films occasionally, but it's not the same. It's
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
it feels more like it's just it's less of a let's talk about making art and more of a let's find another angle with which to kind of just be an arm of the marketing.
Mm.
And again, behind the scenes stuff was always a little bit of that anyways, but there was just this element of, you could know all about how they made it. You could know all about what they were thinking. You could know all about like why they did these things they did. And so if there was something you really liked and really enjoyed, you could learn you could learn why.
Yeah.
That's a weird thing to say, but why did you like it? Like why did you enjoy it? What was it that was so effective about it? And it kind of gave people another level of like critical insight. It gave people a lot more vocabulary with which to talk about things.
Mhm.
But also, and this is the exact example I used the other day, but in 1997, when you went into the theater and you saw the first sneak preview for Disney's Hercules, that trailer in the theater was about 10 seconds of finished footage. And the rest of the trailer was pencil tests where they were still animating it on paper, and it was the storyboards and character designs, and it was just them talking about how they were working so hard and they were so excited to show it to us. And it was literally like it was like a sneak peek, but it was a sneak peek that was completely predicated on this idea that the audience would understand what they were looking at.
Yeah.
This behind the scenes footage of artists doing their craft at the highest level they could, that you would be excited about then,
Right.
you know? Like,
Mhm.
"Oh, another one of those, great," and that they did that same trailer on the VHS tapes. So your clamshell, old Disney VHS tapes, if you bought one of the Disney Vault movies that was out in '97, that the Hercules pencil test trailer was the trailer. And I feel like in terms of marketing and like the corporate element of the industry, like they would be terrified to show us that,
Mhm.
you know?
Right.
It's one of those things where like they have to be so careful when they do test screenings that people understand that like the CGI effects aren't finished,
Mhm.
you know? And it's like I feel like there was a point in time where that would have been kind of almost like a common knowledge kind of a thing. Like, of course they're not finished yet. Like those things take time. And now you'll be like, oh, they leaked and the special effects look terrible. And I'm like, were they even finished?
Mhm.
You know, like what are we talking about?
Right.
It's just we have so much more access to so much more media, and they're making more media, and we have so many more opportunities to make this stuff. So that's definitely not bad. Like more access to putting media out there, never bad. But there's also this emphasis on only looking at things when they're finished.
Mhm.
That really is it's kind of a bummer. I think it puts a lot of pressure on people.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, that's I feel like it's a bit of a tangent, but it's the conversation just got me thinking in that direction of like it is medium, but also there are so many steps in animation, but there's so many steps in the live action stuff too. And we need to cultivate an appreciation for those steps
Yeah.
that I think is has gotten lost. But an appreciation of people doing their jobs well is something that I think is also, you know, suffering of late.
Yeah. No, I think no, I thought that was a beautiful tangent because you highlighted again like so many different things that sparked into my head and like how, I do remember like the Hercules trailer and like really that just like flashed back to me in the sense of like, appreciating the process of it all and also like the hard work like of the animators and there's also I think it was like when Sonic also like when that leaked and how everyone was like, "Oh no, Sonic looks like that," and they changed
Yeah,
the
yeah.
whole aside from that, it's like it reminded me of just like how much pressure like the animators and the artists have on themselves. And so for something like that to, get feedback right away, without having watched like the whole film or seeing like what that process is, it just made me feel that yeah, the audience like wasn't appreciative. Like there was, the hype of like wanting to see the film, but the fact that they were already criticizing it before it was even out. So that
Yeah.
just kind of made me think on that too. And there was another point that you had mentioned as well, which was about yeah, I guess, like, yeah, the overall, like, appreciation of, like, the work itself. Oh, and also, like, being able to, like, talk about it too, and that's what I think really brings DCIFF, like, to light here is, like, really having that forum component, like, at the end of the each of the programs or each of the films that we showcase, like, we all invite, like, all the filmmakers to come up and also talk and also have the audience ask questions so that way we can have these deep and meaningful conversations to better understand not only like the work that you're bringing, but also, what this vision is and ultimately what you want, what you want, but ultimately what the audience saw in terms of inspiration.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that appealed to me the most. And I found out about DC just literally, I think, like, the Film Freeway website suggested it at one point, like, I don't really know how I found out about it,
Mhm.
but the idea of trying to do the festival with a emphasis on filmmaker attendance and that idea of, like, the forum setting. You know, because I mean, a lot of film festivals have an opportunity of like, does anyone want to come up? We've got like 10 minutes before the next screening. You can ask a couple questions, yada yada. But the kind of emphasis that you all kind of put in it, the point of it, the limited selection, the way you the documentation on the website and on Film Freeway kind of describe the curation of the programs and this audience participation kind of angle is definitely like that's why I sent the film in. Like I was like, oh, that sounds good. Like again, that kind of goes back to that's what I want is I just want what I really want is for the film to really piss somebody off or or make them feel really weird or bad, and I'll have to hear about it. Like, that's a really strange thing to say, but, like, you know, I've worked on a lot of television shows that, the crew was great, the production was fine. Maybe there was something on the network or, like, upper echelon level that was not perfect, but, the show comes out and then it lasts a season and then it's gone, and these are shows that don't even have physical media. Like, you can't find a lot of these episodes even streaming,
Right.
even archived on YouTube. Like, they're just gone, and I think a lot of people who work in the industry, like, they've worked on pilots that never get picked up but are also still kind of, like, locked away behind contracts and things like that. So, like, there's just I worked for 6 months and, like, it's no one will get to see it. And so that experience of releasing a film during the height of the COVID lockdowns, like, for me, was very similar to what I'd experienced professionally in some instances. And, like, I'm just like, it felt very much like I got some feedback about my previous film, and it was fine, but it was only ever streaming. And so, like, it was more like it got into the festival, but, like, there was no, like, did the audience like it? Do we know? Like,
Mhm.
did you poll the people after you streamed it? Like, I wanted that thing of, like, oh, they really hated this, or they liked it, or, oh, they brought up a good point. I didn't even think about that, or, yeah, that does seem to represent that, but that's not what I meant. Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
that kind of a thing is like, I think that's why people make art. And I hesitate to refer to what I'm doing as art. Like, it feels very much like I'm a craftsperson who builds things rather than that idea of the painter aspiring to loftier goals. But again, that's a chip on my shoulder. That's a hang up I have. I would never say that about someone else, like, who does exactly what I do. I'd never be like, but you're not an artist. Like, no, we all are. But there's something in my lineage of blue collar workers that is makes me go, ooh. But yeah, like, you wanna, like, that's the thing. Yeah, like, I would rather someone hate it and tell me than have it be meh, it was okay.
Right.
Like like were you in some festivals? Yeah, I was. How many people saw it? We have no idea. Like, we don't know. I don't know. Like, it was a link that you could click on. It's very strange. So yeah, that's for me what I think is exciting about DCIFF.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, no, exactly. And no, I'm so glad we've had this conversation today. And, like, even, there's so many, well, loops that we had gone into, in the sense, well, I'd say not even loops, the depth that we had gone into really helped me, like, foresee, or I say foresee, but I would say, like, really think about, like, what the value brings of not only just, like, film festivals, but, like, what animators and, you know, filmmakers combine, like, just really are bringing to this too, is the element of experience, but, just taking it a step further by having these conversations. So, and even the podcast too, to go a little bit more in depth.
Excellent.
Yeah. Well, this has been very insightful and such an engaging conversation, John. I really appreciate you meeting with us. And is there anything that I may not have asked, or points that you wanted to share that you wanted to share on the podcast?
Ooh, I don't know. I don't feel like I talked about the film very much, which feels very weird.
That's okay. We're building on the conversation of
Yeah.
animation too. So, mhm.
Yeah, no, I don't think so, Aaron. I think there's nothing that's sticking out in my head that's like, "Oh, I better make sure I say that." So,
Okay.
I'll say no.
Okay.
Hopefully that's true.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'll be sharing in the show notes too, like a link to your website as well as the social channels and YouTube, so that way we can all follow you and support you on your journey as well. And yeah, I hope everyone comes to the experimental shorts program that will be on February 16th, which is one of the last days of our film festival, but it's an exciting program that we have lined up too, and to see John T. Hill's film next show in 90 minutes. So thank you so much, John, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
This podcast is brought to you by the DCIFF supporters. We could not be here without all of you to be sharing this amazing outlet with filmmakers from around the world. If you are interested in supporting DCIFF, head on over to our website through the link description in the bio of this episode, or you can go right to the website, which is DCIFF-indie.org, to connect with us and learn more about our Future of Film programs, our festival, and also more educational opportunities in what we do with our high school students, community, and beyond. We look forward to your support.